What's up? My name's Drew. I'm an amateur runner here in Flagstaff, Arizona. With the Boston Marathon coming up, I wanted to take this time to give people a quick overview of the course, what to expect, and some tips to get through it. I ran the Boston Marathon in 2023, and despite it not being my best race, in fact, it was probably my worst race, I still had an amazing time because I had a few things that I kept in mind throughout the course of the race, and I also learned some things from messing up. So, in this video, I will share key features of the course and how to manage them, pacing strategy, and other pre and post logistics and tips that I learned from going through the Boston Marathon. Let's go. Usually people break up marathon courses into 5K chunks, but I'm going to take a little bit of a less conventional approach and break up the Boston Marathon into 4 key zones. And each of those zones will have key characteristics and features that you'll have to face, and hopefully that'll help you track what are the obstacles within each zone, what are the race strategies that I'm going to employ to beat those obstacles, and hopefully have a successful race. Okay, so the first of 4 zones is going to be Zone 1, the start. The beginning of the Boston Marathon is a significant downhill over the course of the first 1 to 4 miles, roughly. This downhill means that most people are going to be running very, very quickly, and probably quicker than they should be running based on what their goal is. So if you go through the beginning of the Boston Marathon, those first 4 miles, running significantly quicker than your typical marathon pace or your goal marathon pace, you are probably getting yourself into trouble because your legs are going to be pretty beat up from the downhill, and that's just in the first few miles of the race. So the best way to manage this part of the race is finding a spot in the corral where you can be comfortable. You don't have to move up or back with your pace group. You want to find people who are running a similar pace to you, and then you're going to want to settle in and try not to move too much. Just settle into that comfortable pace, and I'll go through a few different ways of managing your pace at this part of the race, but make sure that you know what that pace is prior to the race. Make sure you know what your true marathon effort is, and then you'll be able to gauge what that effort should be at the beginning of the race. The beginning of the race is going to dictate what your pacing strategy will be for the remainder of the race. The way I see it, there are 3 different ways that you can start off the Boston Marathon, and the first one is going to be you can start conservatively. That means that you'll probably be running about 5 to 10 seconds per mile, or maybe 3 to 6 seconds per kilometer slower than what your goal race pace is. Taking this approach will allow you to conserve energy over that beginning part of the race. You'll feel really good, and it'll help you roll into what I'd consider Zone 2, which is the middle part of the race. The second approach to Zone 1 is going to be running at your marathon effort or at your marathon goal pace. Both this first and second approach will allow you to be set up to potentially run an even split for the race, or even perhaps a negative split, which is both are very challenging in Boston because of the nature of the course. It's very hilly toward the middle end of the race, and many people run the beginning very quickly, which sets them up for a poor second half. So as long as you can manage your effort at the beginning of the race, either running conservatively, like I said, 5 to 10 seconds per mile slower than what you typically would run, or running at that goal marathon pace, those are 2 very smart strategies to take, which leads me to my third strategy. The third strategy is probably the most risky route for most people, but if you're an experienced marathoner, you really know how to pace yourself, and you have really good race strategy and execution, then you probably can manage to run this way. And this strategy is going to be running a little bit quicker than what that goal marathon pace is. So most people, I wouldn't recommend that they run the race this way, because it can be a little dangerous if you misjudge how quickly you're running. But as long as you're about 5 to 10 seconds faster than your marathon goal pace, you should be able to manage it if you're someone who usually runs smart, knows your plan, and sticks to it. If that is not you, and I trust that whoever you are watching this video, hopefully you know yourself and you can be honest with yourself, you really want to make sure that you don't overshoot the beginning of the race, because like I said, you're going to set yourself up for a potential bonk and blow up once you get to the Newton Hills. So overall, I recommend pacing strategies 1 and 2 for this first zone of the race, which is miles 1 through 4. Okay, now we get to zone 2 of the marathon course, which I consider the cruise. So this is where you're going to want to just settle into your marathon effort and just hit the cruise control and cruise through the middle of the course. This is from miles 5 to roughly 15 of the marathon course. After mile 4, you're going to hit a little bit of a sharp uphill into mile 5, and then you're going to start some rollers. These rollers are going to take you through Framingham, Natick, and Wellesley. I really thought that this was a fun part of the course because there's tons of spectators, even in these what you'd consider relatively small towns. So when running through these rolling hills, you're going to want to make sure that you maintain a steady marathon effort, a true marathon effort, manage the uphills, and then cruise through the downhills. And that's why I call it the cruise, because you're really just kind of on cruise control. When your car is on cruise control, it knows what that speed is. When you're going up a hill, it gives it a little bit more gas, but it's not going to floor it. It's going to just keep that steady pace through the uphill and through the downhill. You should be able to manage a pretty steady effort. And then you're going to get to a really fun part, which is about midway. You're going to get to the Wellesley College Scream Tunnel, which was super cool. It's extremely loud. Some people stop and kiss the girls. Me personally, that was not my thing. And after you get through that middle section of the race, you're going to get to mile 15. And then that's where zone 3 of the race, which is the most challenging part of the course, will begin. Most commonly known as the Newton Hills. It is a series of 4 different individual hills that you're going to have to manage at the end of the race. They range from what I'd assume are probably a few hundred meters up to maybe a third of a mile, maybe a little bit longer than that on Heartbreak Hill, which is the longest hill. So after cruising through those rollers, you're going to hit a sharp downhill after 15, and then you're going to roll into 16, and that's where the uphills start. One tip for managing hills that I like is always focusing on your form, both on the uphill and the downhill. Having proper form means that you have a slight hinge at your hips forward, so your torso is slightly leaned forward. You've got your cadence is going to be quick and relatively short steps so that you keep that cadence up and keep your legs feeling alive. And you're going to want to maintain a steady, moderate effort through the uphill, manage that hill, get to the top, get your cadence back, roll into the downhill with a quicker cadence, and then just cruise on that downhill and try to conserve your energy until you have to manage that next hill. And you're going to do this 4 times throughout the Newton Hills. It's very tough, but it totally depends on how you manage the beginning half of the race. So if you totally blew out the first half of the race and you ran way too quick and you're gonna positive split on the second, these hills are really gonna suck because your legs and your quads might be pretty blown out from the downhills at the beginning and the rollers through the middle if you mismanage them. And so if your quads are hurting, you have no effort to push up those hills, and then when you're going down, you have no effort or energy within those legs to manage that braking effect of running downhill where your legs are hitting the ground. There's impact going up your chain that's going to cause you to kind of naturally be putting on the brakes with every step. So you're fighting that by trying to have good form and keep your cadence up and keep your steps relatively short and just cruise and manage the effort. From what I remember, the hardest hill for me was the second hill, which is a sharp right after the fire station, and then you hit a very steep uphill. I don't know what that hill is called. I don't know what the road's called, but it was pretty steep and it was relatively short. but it really got me gassed going up it. So, I mean, if there's any hills that you're really kind of thinking about conserving energy for, I think those first couple hills, figuring out how you're going to manage them, having a strategy, and then by the time you get over to Heartbreak Hill, which is the 4th hill, you'll have a plan, you'll have got through the majority of it, and hopefully the mental obstacle of having to get through those first few hills will help you just manage Heartbreak and get to the top, then roll into the rest of the race, which is where you start having the fun. Despite being the longest hill, I actually found that Heartbreak Hill was the most manageable for me. It's very long, but it's a little bit more consistent of a grade, and it's not as sharp. So you can kind of keep that really consistent effort going up it. So once you find what that is and settle in, look around, embrace the struggle that everyone's going through with you, and just be present and get through it. So zone 4, the final stretch, is going to be from miles 22 through the end of the race to 26, which takes you from Brookline into Boston. Very fun part of the course. For me, it was the most memorable. If you've been following a proper strategy or one of the strategies that I've laid out in this video, you probably are going to be feeling good. If you've fueled well and consistently throughout the race, roughly every 5K or so, and you got to this point of the race where you're starting to roll downhill from Heartbreak Hill, mile 22, mile 23, mile 24, those are all downhill miles. You can really settle into a solid pace, cruise those downhills, conserve as much energy as you can for that final stretch of the race, which is going to be miles 24 to 26. Now, if you've blown out your quads or bonked from under fueling, then this part of the race is going to be very challenging, because you'll find at the end of a marathon, when you go to push yourself after you have bonked, or you have no glycogen in your muscles, or your quads are totally cashed from running downhill really, really hard when you shouldn't have, it's going to be very hard for those legs to push. That's where the smart strategy comes into play, because you want to make sure you have enough energy at the end of the race to push really hard, do a full send to the end of the to the finish line, and that'll really allow you to just bring it home going down Boylston Street. So the best strategy to run this final zone 4 of the marathon course is to just settle into what is a very comfortably hard marathon effort. With how many people are going to be spectating and on the sidelines going through Brookline and into Boston, I mean, it really is amazing. It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. And then once you hit 24, I'd call this the full send zone, where you can just give everything you've got, mile 24, mile 25. And then once you get to mile 25, you're really close to those final turns where you're going to go right on Hereford, left on Boylston, and just full send down to the finish line. Okay, so all of the marathon course overview and everything, we're all through the race strategy. Now I want to get to pre and post logistics and challenges that you'll face in Boston that you probably haven't faced elsewhere. Boston was my first marathon major that I had run. I never had experienced a marathon of this size or a field of this size, so it is very different. A few things that set apart the Boston Marathon from other marathons. First is the late start. So for me, this was the biggest thing, because I didn't factor this into my training. A lot of my runs, I like to start very early in the morning, and I think most runners probably prefer very early starts. So your fueling strategy is going to change. My biggest recommendation is going to be not to fuel multiple times throughout the morning, but to just push that breakfast out a little bit longer. So if you usually wake up at 5 o'clock and you don't start running till 10, I would not eat at 5 and then eat at 7. It's a lot on your stomach. And the best thing for me has been to just keep it really simple. So I would recommend just waiting a little bit longer. Make sure you have enough dinner the night before. And then after you wake up and you need to start thinking about breakfast, I would just eat breakfast at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, eat a typical 250 to 450 calorie breakfast, something that's balanced in carbs and sugars with maybe a little bit of fat and a small amount of fiber, but not too much on the fat, not too much on the fiber or protein, because that can really upset your stomach as well. So with a 10 a.m. start, fueling is going to be a big factor. I wouldn't eat any closer than 2 hours to the race. and I wouldn't really eat any further than 3 hours from the race. For me, my sweet spot is usually about 2.5 hours prior. Gets everything kind of digested out of my stomach, where I can start putting marathon fuel in during the race and it doesn't upset anything. It doesn't try and speed things up. Second is that there are a lot of runners. So when you get to the start line, make sure you're able to find your corral. Find people with a similar bib number to you, because your bib number is going to reflect your qualifying time. So you'll understand who's going to be running a similar time as you, or just ask your neighbor, hey, what do you plan on running? I'm going to be running this pace. Figure out where that spot is. Maybe you're at the front, maybe you're at the back of the corral, and surround yourself with people that are probably running a similar pace to you, because once the race starts, you probably have 3 or 4 miles where you're not going to be able to move. It's very cramped. You're not going to be able to run up or back without significant energy consumption. Figuring out how to bob and weave around people, it's kind of a nightmare. With congestion, another factor is the aid stations and how crowded the aid stations can get. If you know that you're nearing an aid station, check that course map, make sure ahead of time you know where those aid stations are, the fuel aid stations, then also the water, and make sure that you're in a spot that's flexible. So you don't want to be in the first line grabbing waters and grabbing gels, because it gets very crowded. People stop, people trip, they slip. Stay a few people over so you can easily maneuver, grab something, and then get the hell out of there and get away from the commotion. You also don't want to be too far, because then you'll have to travel very far over there to grab your fuel and then travel back to where you were. It's going to use a lot of extra energy. So it's all about saving energy, playing it smart, avoiding accidents. And finally, post-race. My post-race experience kind of sucked because it was pouring rain. It was not warm. It was probably like 50 degrees, and I'm, soaking wet head to toe. Just had the worst experience of my life in this race. No fuel in my body anymore. Everything has left from the back end, sadly. And all I had was a banana and a granola bar and no phone, and couldn't find my my wife and friends. Determine what that plan is pre-race for that post-race get-together. It can be very challenging for people to get into the secure zone. So my wife had an issue getting in. It took her like 45 minutes to get through a line. And I was standing there soaking wet, no phone, nowhere to go, in a city that I didn't know where I was. And that was very challenging. Post-race, they usually have letters, designated spots with letters that correspond to your name. So those are the easiest plan A, and then a plan B might be, okay, I'm leaving the secure zone and I'm going to this little restaurant down the street. Okay, those are some of my recommendations based on my experience running Boston in 2023 and the experience of people that I coach who have run Boston recently as well. To recap some pacing strategies, Zone 1, which is miles 1 through 4 of the race, play it conservative. Zone 2, which is miles 5 through 15, you're going to want to cruise, settle into that marathon race pace, just go off of the adrenaline of those crowds, the Wellesley College girls, the Scream Tunnel, just absorb it all, stay present, stay focused on your goal. Zone 3, which is the Newton Hills, manage the hills, cruise the downhills and conserve energy. And Zone 4 is cruise into downtown, cruise into Brookline, cruise into Boston, get into that full send zone, mile 24, 25, and just give it all you got. If you like this video, hit the like button below, drop a comment as well. Let me know where you're from and what your Boston Marathon time goal is. Please also subscribe to get practical advice and running tips from someone just like you. I'm just a normal amateur runner, someone who started running about 5 years ago. Now it's my life. So I'm doing this to provide useful information to people who are looking for it. Hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Let me know in the comments what you want to hear from me, and I'll do my best to work that into my video rotation. So thank you, everyone. Good luck out there in Boston. Happy running. Have a good one. Peace.